coming to Hinduism in America, not many know that there is a significantly, although a small but still a growing community of Hindus, practicing Hindus in America, not native Hindus, and I mean white Hindus, for want of a better term. Can you talk a little bit? You have also written a book on Hinduism in America. So could you talk a little bit about the history of Hinduism in America, just briefly, just whatever you can tell us about it?
Certainly, and I'll comment quickly on the demographics that you just mentioned as well. We have approximately 3 million people in America who self-identify as Hindu. That's a little bit less than 1% of the population, so it is a small minority. It is mostly people who were born to the tradition, who inherited the tradition, and who either have emigrated to the US or whose parents, or in some cases grandparents, immigrated to the US. But fully 9% of Hindus, self-identified Hindus in America, are not, as you said, native Hindus. And there are 4% who are white, 2% are African American, 1% are Hispanic, and then there are 2% who describe themselves as mixed. And I think many of these people probably have one Indian parent and one parent who's not Indian, though that's not always the case. Tulsi Gabbard, who ran for president, is of mixed heritage, but not Indian mixed heritage. She's a Samoan and Irish heritage. So it is a diverse community. It's mostly people from India or countries near India. Yes. But there are more of us now, increasingly, who are not. And then you have people who don't necessarily self-identify as Hindu, but if you look at their beliefs and their practices, they're often members of an organization like the Vedanta Society or Self-Realization Fellowship, Transcendental Meditation. Then you get an even wider number of people. So your question was about history. So how did this all happen? And of course, it all starts with Swami Vivekananda coming to America in 1893 and really making a big impression on people here. In fact, there is a prehistory. Even before Swami Vivekananda, there were people who were reading about and inspired by Hindu traditions. So you have people like the Transcendentalists, the Theosophical Society. I just gave an online talk for the Theosophical Society yesterday, in fact. So they paved the way for the positive reception that Swami Vivekananda got from a segment of Americans. And so then throughout the early 20th century, more Hindu teachers started coming to the West. The next big name is Paramahansa Yogananda in 1920. But then in 1924, because of a combination of religious bigotry and racism, a law was passed called the Asian Exclusion Act, and immigration from India, China, Japan, this was greatly curtailed. So you don't get any big teachers coming from India for 40 years. There's a big gap. Then in 1965, after the civil rights legislation was passed in 64 because of Martin Luther King's activism, Martin Luther King, of course, influenced by Mahatma Gandhi. So you have an Indic connection there as well. Yeah. So then in 65, the Asian Exclusion Act was lifted. And then you've gotten ever larger waves of immigration from India from the late 60s to the present, including spiritual teachers. So A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, founder of ISKCON, comes in late 65 and starts his organization. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, Swami Muktananda, many more come. And of course, that coincides with the American counterculture in the 60s, where a lot of people were, rebels like me, sort of questioning the values of the larger society, and many were finding an alternative in Hinduism.
Were you part of that movement in the so-called?
I'm a bit young. I'm a bit young for that. I was born in 1969. Yeah. But I would say I was born during the period of I grew up during the reverberations of that period. Yes, I grew up in the 70s. And so some people say the 60s really started in 1963 when Kennedy was assassinated, and they didn't end until 1974. So in that sense, I grew up in that period. And so and I've always admired the music of that period. And in fact, that was part of my story of feeling drawn to Hinduism, because listening to the music of the Beatles and George Harrison and how drawn they were to all of this. And I've heard the two surviving Beatles, Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, they both still practice meditation today. and use their mantra that they got from the Maharishi. So that's
But
still.
also there was a period of disenchantment too. I read about that too, about
Yes.
people's disenchantment with the whole. Apparently, they left the ashram in a bit of a huff or something of the sort.
Yeah, there was a rumor. It later turned out to be false, but there was a rumor that went around about the Maharishi, and Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr had already left. They kind of lost interest at that point. I think they've returned to it later in life.
Yes.
And John Lennon confronted the Maharishi about it, and the Maharishi was mystified. Said, "No, what are you talking about?" And John Lennon had the idea that the Maharishi should be able to read their minds and know what they were thinking. And he said, "No, I don't know what you're thinking." And so he became disenchanted.
Okay, so you're not that great after all.
Exactly. And George Harrison stuck with it. He was the most serious about it, and he stuck with it throughout his life.
Interesting. I'm surprised you didn't mention Rajneesh and Osho. I mean, Osho, Rajneesh.
Oh yeah, another very important teacher. That's right. Yeah. In fact, there are probably quite a few I neglected to mention because there's fairly large. There are so many. And yes, he was another very important one. Absolutely.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.